Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in this fine world of ours. Welcome to the Drive Enterprise Transformation with VR and AR webinar, produced in conjunction with the VRX Immersive Enterprise conference taking place in Boston on June 26th and 27th. I'm delighted to bring together our esteemed group today, which is moderated by Amy Peck, a good friend of VRX from EndeavorVR, and welcome to Elizabeth Barron, who runs VR and advanced visualization at Ford, Scott Aldridge, who is the innovation disruptive technology leader at CDM Smith, and Michael Fallon, who directs digital business design for Schneider Electric. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Amy, who's going to moderate this session for us. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Pete, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I think what I'd like to do is just start with quick intros, maybe just tell us a little bit more about your respective visions at each of your companies, and why don't we start with Elizabeth?
Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Barron, and doing some really cool stuff at Ford Motor Company in immersive realities. So basically what we've been working on is using the immersive paradigm as a way of communicating between different groups in different disciplines at Ford, and providing a very rich data set that speaks to multiple disciplines so that people of different groups could easily communicate in the immersive environment. So a quick example of that would be an artist communicating with a scientist and trying to have the two of them come to an understanding on, the look and performance of a vehicle. And we've really created this foundation, and we use immersive reviews as a matter of course of business at Ford. And I'm excited to talk with everybody and learn.
That's great. Thanks, Elizabeth. And Scott, can you share a little bit about what you are working on at CDM Smith?
Yes. Thank you for asking me to be here today. It's a pleasure to speak with these fine folks. So at CDM Smith, we're using immersive visualization primarily as part of our virtual design and construction approach to how we deliver projects to our clients. VDC is all about collaboration between design, construction, and the client. And in particular, we use mainly VR and MR, mixed reality, to augment current processes and procedures that allow us to have a better understanding, a better collaborative environment, and deliver better outcomes to our clients.
That's great. Thank you. And Michael, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your work at Schneider Electric.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. So my role at Schneider Electric is facing toward the businesses and customers. And our role is really at the front end of innovation, is looking at what are the problems to solve for customers and more importantly, users of technology, and how do we make their lives easier, more productive, and basically driving outcomes as well. And we work in the intersection of technology and business results. And we're looking today at the entire experience of mainly AR as a customer-facing technology in terms of how the everything from eyewear to desire to be hands-free, desire to perhaps use voice as a way to simplify procedures and services, and to ensure that technology is not complicating the end process. And so that's where we're focusing today.
Thank you for that. And then just to share a little bit about EndeavorVR, we are a strategy and consulting firm, and we work primarily with Fortune 500 companies on leveraging this technology. And much like you've heard with, from all three of our companies here today, just kind of understanding the landscape and thinking in terms of an end-to-end strategy at scale. And I think maybe it's great to start with what Michael was talking about, because you're focused on the consumer piece, and that's been talked about quite a lot in our industry. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you see the technology on the customer-facing side and tackling what you just mentioned, some of the fear of adopting new technology and not really having control necessarily of the customer experience since they're not part of your workforce. So how are you treating that and working through that?
Yeah, thank you very much. A great question. So, frankly, at Schneider, in terms of how we look at digital technologies, AR being one of them, we're not necessarily interested in always being first, but more interested in being better. And so, frankly, being a market leader on the front end when technology for our customers, where it may not be ready, is part of how we level set how we think of technology around AR. And so that might appear to be a bit conservative, but it's more around thinking of, our customers are working in end users are working in power and energy types of businesses. They're working in industrial type of enterprises and manufacturing operations. And field service, very complicated field service in oil and gas, as well as building management type of operations. And so, we really think about, again, we have good debates internally with my technology colleagues around what's ready and for what purpose. And, for instance, for us and our customers and our end users, the experience of AR in a handheld device isn't practical. Not suggesting it's not practical in other use cases, but the relationship with our customers and their users experience to be more productive, to do things faster, to be able to also generate educational opportunities in how to provide maintenance to equipment and complex systems is really predicated on things like how can they be hands-free and not tied to the technology. What are the issues around eyewear or headwear, and also we get into and think about in terms of cloud versus edge and data latency, and how does that provide an experience for our end users and in what environments, whether they're in Africa or South Korea or North America. So it's quite diverse.
Thank you for that. And Elizabeth, a little bit to that end, in terms, you mentioned, looking at different business lines and your workforce involved in the different business lines. What is the approach there in terms of having that kind of seamless user experience?
No, that's a fantastic question, and I was listening to what Michael was saying with a lot of interest, because I think there's a lot of parallel, especially what's ready and for what purpose. I think that's a big thing for user experience, for communication with different disciplines. And the example he gave of using a handheld AR versus a wearable, if you're in field service, that won't work. And the same type of thing happens over and over again at Ford when we're trying to get different disciplines to communicate effectively. We have to use the right tool for the job. And so part of the strategy that we've employed for the way immersive realities have been deployed is to do just that. What is the right tool for the job? Just because it's cool doesn't mean it's going to work effectively. And in these times, these are exciting times. There are a lot of new innovations going on, and you can really almost daily find new devices and new things to use. But in the end, what is the value, and how do you bring that value consistently, but on the cutting edge to your organization or company? And so the way that we've looked at this is through the paradigms of the use cases that we normally do. So we have a long and established series of processes for how we communicate and share, and like metrics and deliverables for vehicle development. And where can the immersive realities come in and affect that? So in the engineering space, there's a lot we can do with providing data and visualizing it in new ways. But I think one of the most exciting new things that we can do is really around that user experience that you first brought up, and using that experience and being able to use the immersive paradigm to actually create the feeling of what it's like to be in a well-crafted, really fun Ford vehicle is like the most wonderful thing, because it really brings in everything that we're trying to do, because the end result, we want to provide these amazing vehicles that are a surprise and delight to own to our customers. And I think that bringing the voice of the customer really early and very often into our product development process is like one of the biggest strengths that immersive realities have to offer.
I love how you draw the parallel for the experience that you want your actual Ford drivers to have into your workforce. I think that's fantastic. I'm actually going to jump to a couple of questions that people have written in chat. And again, for anyone else who's out there, please do write your questions in the chat panel, and we will get to them, hopefully all of them. But if not, we'll save some, and perhaps we can get back to you offline. But there are two that are very relevant to this topic that we're on now. And one is, how did you frame the business case and ROI to get these projects off the ground? And whose tech did you use? Was it Microsoft, HTC, Oculus, et cetera? And I think I'll give that one to Scott.
Thank you. That question is one I often ask myself. How did I get funding for this? I'll tell you what we ended up doing. We're an early innovator in mixed reality. I agree almost wholeheartedly with what these folks have said as well. You need the right use case. You're not going to throw every tool at it. When Microsoft announced the HoloLens back in January, I think, of 2015, I was going through the process of exploring various augmented reality glasses and having talks with different manufacturers and looking at use cases. We were already using the DK1 and 2, or 1 and then 2 from Oculus Rift to do virtual reality. When I saw what Microsoft showed, I was blown away by the possibilities. And then when I actually got to experience it for myself, it was a game changer for me. Fortunately, we had folks within our firm who saw the value for the work that we do. And we contributed some R&D funds. Normally we are not a leading innovator. We're very conservative, but in this case, we saw it as a game changer, and it's been a very good investment for us. But virtual design and construction is the process of design and construction partners collaborating simultaneously on work, and to ensure that the client's vision and your vision matches up. And we saw mixed reality and the ability to see three-dimensional holograms in the real world at scale as a potential game changer for that a new type of immersive collaboration, because large-scale collaboration really is a new norm on the projects that we go after. So I was very fortunate to have some very forward-thinking superiors who agreed in the investment. I will say HoloLens is a fantastic tool. It's limited in its current form, current first version, but it is fantastic for certain use cases. And as we were going through the process of storyboarding out what we thought we would be able to use it for without this is even before the devices were available or even before we knew what the final specs would be, we came up with collaboration as the biggest benefit for us. So I'm not even sure if I answered that question accurately, but or effectively, but there you go.
No, I think you did a great job. I think we'd all like to have higher ups in a C-suite who are as agreeable as yours are. And so I think I'd like to have Michael tackle this next one. Somebody mentioned, we can scroll down. Actually, well, I'll have to paraphrase because the question's kind of gone up. But the question is, do you think that MR plus AI and with computer vision, perhaps on a HoloLens, would be a great example for Industry 4.0? And I think that's a great question, particularly relative to what you guys have been working on over at Schneider Electric. So can you comment on that a little bit, Michael?
Sure. Thank you very much. So my first answer is going to be simple. It's going to be yes. Again, going back to where my group is focused, yes, and aligned to the appropriate use case and users that makes their life easier, more productive, allows them to do things faster. And again, these are the great conversations I have internally with my technology groups. The answer always starts with yes, and then now where can we bring value? Connect my answer to the previous question around ROI and funding is really starting, if you're just starting on the journey, start small, find the right problem to solve. Okay, start with the business question, start with the user complexity problem, and then apply the technology with AI and MR and all these things that you can do. The thing that I would caution people about is to do it because you can is problematic, because if you're eventually working with the business, they will not understand a technology led type of approach. And of course, if you're looking for funding because you're in the new early stages of trying to get support, the people who have the money aren't going to understand that. And so that's how I would also answer this. Now, switching to technology, I will add one more thing to the technology, which is voice enablement. And so we believe between the appropriate, comfortable eyewear or headwear, but probably preferring eyewear, with AI capabilities, as well as voice enablement of how a user can work, can provide some really interesting value for people. I'll finish by saying, having said that, when you move to AI and when you want to also get involved with AR, understanding at the ground floor level where your data is, can you get access to the data for appropriate AI that's really intelligent and accurate? Do you have the data models to be able to visualize in an accurate way? All these things are critical to your back end to be able to provide an experience that's worthwhile.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit on, but thinking about, building a 3D digital asset library. So Elizabeth, I know you are working a lot with design teams. I'd love to hear what the strategy is. And this goes back to ROI, because obviously there's a lot of investment, sort of upfront investment in the early stages. And to Michael's point, you want to have something small, you want to have those kind of critical early wins, but you always have to keep an eye on the scalability of the solution, how it's going to integrate with legacy systems and so forth. So just even starting with, building this library that may be, again, valuable across business lines. So that could go from design and then potentially through marketing materials, and then potentially even on the dealership floor where, consumers are actually able to interact with the designs of the car, on a much more personal level. So Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, sure. So that is foundational. So this totally ties in with the question on ROI as well, because if you have a platform and a pipeline, it is much more effective for your implementation of AR and VR and MR in your company. So the smart people at Ford have worked really hard to provide a foundation that I was able to take advantage of. And so there is a way that we organize our vehicles, and we can basically, if you have access, there's of course security requirements, you can get and build any digital vehicle at almost any point in the process. And so we spent a considerable amount of time on that infrastructure, because just because we could go get the data doesn't mean we knew the most effective way to build immersive environments. And that was something we spent a good bit of time on, and now it runs like clockwork. And that upfront investment has allowed us to flourish with the use of the tech. So last year we did, I think, like around 600, we had 600 requests for immersive reviews just in our lab in North America. That's not a global number, that's just the one number. And so all of those are environments that were created based on this foundation where, we had a known structure, a known product structure. And then the other thing I think is really important for VR, AR, and MR is you need to go back. So at any point when we're immersed in performing a study, if we don't destroy the product structure, and then we can't go back and know what that part was and what rev level it was. So we maintain those intelligent attributes when we're in the immersive environment. So it allows us to really hook in how we work and other data in, and then that solution becomes much more powerful, because then we can add in engineering requirements and design requirements.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to kind of paraphrase a few questions because they touch on the same topic around input and feedback. Obviously, again, going to sort of the user experience, what sort of the input devices are, and for sort of a natural interface. But then also the feedback where, because we are actually able to track and record, every movement. We can, build heat maps of where the end user is engaged, where they're looking, if it's in a sim and training environment, did they complete the lesson? So Scott, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what are some of the new kind of mechanisms on the input side that you've been seeing, and then on the recording and feedback relative to data, how are you looking at that? How are you assessing and measuring the engagement factor and the success factors?
Yes, thank you. So I will tell you that Michael and Elizabeth have probably done a lot more of this than we have. Here's how we have measured it. Not in a scientific way, but in the results that we're getting from the outcomes for the work that we're doing. Essentially, by using augmented, mixed, and virtual reality, we're able to engage our clients, all the stakeholders in the projects, in a more immersive way. Elizabeth and Michael brought up a lot of great points, and in our industry, AEC, where everything that we do has a 3D model associated with it, all of that pipeline was there. And when we did our initial review of mixed reality to invest in the HoloLens, we brought in experts from every part of the business. All the business units were represented. We had several weeks of brainstorming sessions before we even signed the contract to engage in this. But I would say that where I've seen the feedback is, until now, when we would design something for a client, even a very large, expensive infrastructure project, doing the 3D fly-through on a computer, on a 2D screen, you will get feedback from the clients, and then we can go through this several times at different, percentage completions, for 30%, 60, 90%, you will get feedback. But the feedback you get by immersing them in the environment, especially with mixed reality, because some of the folks do get a little nauseous with the virtual reality, but being able to have someone who works in a facility for 20 years and is going to work in the new facility that's being designed, to give that person the opportunity to immerse themselves and to spatially experience it, and to really give you little things like, okay, well, this is great, but you've got the valves turned this way on this aisle and the valves are turned this way on this aisle. Can we not have them all turned the same way, so when we go to service this, we can do it much more efficiently? Or there's no way I can change a filter right here. This is how it was done in the old system. Let's move it over here. By allowing people to experience things in the real world without nausea, and with our platform, you're able to collaborate with others wherever they are, and you see a hologram or an avatar representation of them. It is just mind-blowing, the number of changes we have before the design is finished. Whereas in the past, it could be, let's start constructing, let's start building, and then, oh, well, this isn't correct. We didn't catch that. So we're finding that kind of feedback is the most valuable.
Thank you for that. And I think this is definitely a valuable question. So maybe, Michael, you could speak to it a little bit. Again, like what data are you collecting from within the immersive environments, and are you wiring it into existing metrics to do a comparison, or how are you really looking at the feedback and interactions?
So again, with where we focus, I'm less tied into our use internally at Schneider as opposed to with customers. And number one, building on what Scott said, and I think he covered it well. And obviously, part of our business is very much in the building arena. Is that the way we see it is that the issues across our industries and industries before I came to Schneider around the aging workforce are substantial. And frankly, to be able to measure the potential of value for a customer around how to be able to help the next round of workers is pretty simple. And the other thing I'll add is that spending time also in a previous life in the educational field, the ability for this technology to enable people who do not naturally learn through written and reading of written words versus visual is substantial. And again, not to make it about the experience, but maybe it is. At the end of the day, not everybody is able to capture and interpret what can be achieved through the written word, and to be able to do it visually, and to be able to accelerate the learning curve of employees around these, and sometimes aging infrastructures is substantial. And again, to echo some of the points that Scott made, the ability to visualize really takes away the interpretation that people have of hearing something or reading something versus experiencing something. And so I'm not really sure if I answered the question well, but that's really what comes to mind on this topic.
I love that you brought up education, because though it's definitely a topic for another time, I do completely agree with you that is something that, from even educating kids all the way through, simulation and training, that the opportunity is to, really educate people in a much deeper way and in a way that they're able to understand instead of just having them follow, a linear path. So someone wrote in a very good question, and it's something that we talk about a lot with our clients, is are you finding that, you look for existing solutions and platforms? I know, Elizabeth, you mentioned that a little bit. Or are you building bespoke solutions using, external or in some cases internal development teams? And Elizabeth, why don't you start? But I think this is something that maybe all three of you could answer.
Sure. So I did have a little bit of feedback on the last question about inputs. And so maybe if you don't mind, I'll touch on that for just a moment. Thank you. The input, like what we can get from an immersive environment and then take back to different disciplines is, I think, one of the strengths of what the technology has to offer. So we do like eye tracking type things and like motion capture, where we're capture somebody in the environment, like where they put their hands and where did they look, those types of things. But I think one of the things that's maybe not as apparent is we can apply our manufacturing process capability to a design without building the vehicle. And then we know how capable we are of producing that vehicle, like what Sigma, like if we're Six Sigma capable of producing that vehicle. And we can look at our vehicle as we would produce it, modify some of the things that we meaning the communities at Ford, but not me, find good or bad, and then export those set of data and bring it back into engineering and design for further analysis. And I think that's a really powerful thing. So we've connected our product development process and some of the inputs of how we manufacture our vehicles and like what our tolerance values are. And then we can export what we think is a better solution and a better look for the customer. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there for that. And then I'll talk about the existing solutions or did we build from scratch? So our general strategy is to not reinvent things that are already out there and amazing. So what we do is kind of that strategy of the right tool for the job. So we use a few different renderers, a few different technologies to get immersed, but it is consistent in the way that we can get immersed and the data and the flow of data around. So in general, we're trying to use whatever is existing, but what we have done that is more specific is putting a layer over that is the way we do our product development. So you don't necessarily have to go into a tool and start clicking things in an interface in order to produce a result in the immersive space during a review, because we have our way of working laid over the softwares that we use so that we can have a common solution in these different spaces where we conduct immersive reviews. So I think that's a really powerful thing. And then just since I have the floor, I'll just say that collaboration is the single most beneficial thing that the executive leaders at Ford saw in the potential and the promise of AR and VR. And collaboration, globally connected collaborative work teams is what really sold the technology and has provided the biggest ROI, I believe, in our company.
That's great, and thank you for answering both of those questions. And Scott, what about at CDM Smith? Are you focused more on building bespoke solutions, or are you out there looking for platforms, or in the case of Ford, sort of a hybrid?
So with VR, we've kind of grown up with the changes in the industry over the last, I'd say, 4 years. So we've just adopted existing platforms with the Unreal engine and Unity, and for a while with Autodesk's Stingray platform. So I think with VR, it's easier to get started and to have things right out of the box that you can start doing with your assets, with your 3D models of whatever you're working on. With augmented reality and mixed reality, it's a little bit more complicated, but with the development of a new iOS kit and Android, you could go either way. There's great scenarios for doing it in-house, and I'm a big believer in third-party experts. And with mixed reality, there were no experts. We actually partnered with probably the first mixed reality agency that was available. And since we were early innovating, there was no pipeline for anything, and so it all had to be created. So we ended up creating our own platform whereby we take our 3D assets and put them in the platform, and we can collaborate and leave notes and create measurements and things of that nature. But I would say that partnering with someone who has the expertise and who has the talent that is always learning and always changing and training, and they have the relationships with the gaming engine makers and the hardware developers. I'm a big believer in paying for expertise until it gets to a point where you need to do it in-house.
Great, thank you. And Michael, do you have a little more comment on that, on whether you're preferring existing platforms or building internally or externally with outside developers?
Yeah, so we I would say over the years have become very much of a partner-centric company. And so, for instance, we work a lot with Microsoft, but certainly also in areas like AR, which are still developing. We tend to, in the early days, keep a broad, and so we want to make sure we understand what's happening around the world. Frankly, we do tend to look for places where, in terms of advantage, both for our customers and frankly Schneider, are there places where we augment and complement and build our own on top of technologies? But like Scott said, we also are very geared toward partnering more from a perspective of always having an eye on the outside world and knowing that innovation can come from outside the businesses that we're in, and having partners that are cross-industry, again, like Microsoft is one example, and certainly also Accenture and Salesforce, two other key partners of ours, is kind of how we view that topic.
That's great. Thank you. So we do seem to have a number of questions around the education piece again, and so maybe we can revisit that in terms of perhaps educating. Again, you mentioned a little bit about, educating the existing workforce and then the new workforce coming up, and actually even being able to tap into all of the, experience of, someone who has been at one of these jobs, and particularly more difficult or sort of craftsman-oriented type of jobs, and be able to kind of take that knowledge and share it with somebody else. So how are you, kind of just in the nuts and bolts arena, educating your teams on the technology itself, use cases, or using it for simulation and training in sort of any of these aspects? And maybe why don't we start with Scott on this one?
Yeah, so thank you. So for the industries we serve, our clients are infrastructure operators, typically of highways, bridges, dams, water, wastewater. Especially in the water and wastewater industry, we see a lot of folks who are retiring, who have a lot of knowledge of the systems, who, when they leave, it goes out the door with them. And you can imagine there are some challenges with getting a newer, younger workforce to want to work in a wastewater treatment facility. I just spent a week at one, and it was a fantastic experience. I don't know why they wouldn't work there, but I would say that what we've done in helping our clients is twofold. First, and I hate to keep focusing on mixed reality, but that's really where we are focused mainly. We use virtual. I was just working on virtual before this call, but with mixed reality, we take advantage of Microsoft HoloLens's Skype abilities to be able to have the operator at a facility go out or send out people to look at issues and problems. These facilities can be hundreds of acres, and they can go out, and anyone with expertise or knowledge, typically one or two people who are in high demand, can get on a Skype call with them, regardless of what device they're using, and see firsthand what it is that person is looking at, and give them direction without having to take the time to go out there. It empowers that person to, over time, be able to do things on their own without that connectivity. But in addition to that, we're also we've done some proofs of concept. We've not actually working with any clients right now on this, but we've done some POCs where we've built what we term simple digital twins, immersive digital twins, using the HoloLens, where someone can pull up an asset that's out in the facility from anywhere. They could be in the office. They pull that asset up and see the live data coming through it, and they can train people right there, or they can have others using a computer or using a HoloLens see that same virtual model, or see the real piece of equipment if they're in the field with virtual data coming through. So it's those I think a lot of people call it remote expert. It's those remote expert modes where we see the most benefit in the clients that we serve. There are obviously lots of applications around safety training, especially in hazardous facilities, and lots of maintenance and asset management scenarios that could be explored, which are things that we are looking at as well. But for the most part, in the current version of the different hardware platforms that are out there now, I think that we're using it as best as we can, and until the hardware gets smaller, lighter, and we have services like 5G that will be able to stream content faster and better to it, and better battery lives and things. I think there's only so much you can do, but I think for what's capable, we're certainly pushing some of those limits.
Great, thank you. And Elizabeth, what about at Ford? What are some of the other applications in terms of training and education? With either AR, MR, or VR.
Yeah, sure. So one of the facets of that question was like, is there an education that needs to happen for the teams for the technology itself? And I think we have been really diligent and kind of stubborn about making sure that whatever we produce has a very small or no learning curve. So basically, like there is the right tool for the job, there's also a way in which people conduct themselves in the physical world that we work very hard to accommodate in the mixed or virtual worlds. So if you put on a headset or a MR device and you interact with data, it should be as much as possible like what would happen if you were looking at the physical representation of that thing. And I think that's really important for the adoption of the technology. If it's closer to what people know, and if it's closer to how they work, then they're more likely to find that connection and get value out of it. And then regarding the education and training aspects, there is a lot of education that goes on between the different disciplines of basically vehicle health. So where are we with the development of this vehicle, and are we meeting our milestone? Do we have issues? And the collaboration and the sharing that goes on in the immersive space really allows this education of the vehicle health and status and where we are. The technology is also used somewhat for training applications on like how to, spray paint. There's a gentleman that I know that is, making an application to paint in the immersive environment, and for some other aspects of understanding, like education of who our customers are and what who we want to connect with, and why it's so important that we consider these things that people do, like using their devices and connectivity with their vehicle. And so there's a lot of like awareness and education that's also going on.
That's great. So going back to, and again, I see a question up here, and there's a couple of questions around, the security of the data and data privacy and data ownership. And does that figure into how you're looking at scaling these applications? And Michael, maybe you can speak to that?
Sure. Quite simply, security is not an area that I personally am in depth knowledgeable about. But at the end of the day, anything that you're digitizing, right, taking into account the security aspects are critical. And again, separate from privacy. And so I said it in a way not to dismiss it, but to say that foundational without a doubt. From a privacy perspective, one of the things that we have seen right now with just kind of what's happening in different parts of the world around, frankly, employment and and also being sensitive to labor laws. We're again, because we're not necessarily gearing up to be first necessarily in launching these technologies, but more to be the best and to be smart, is that the other side to the value and being able to train and prepare for an aging workforce is that not all workforces are comfortable being recorded in any shape or form. And so I will say that along the same line of the maturity of the technology to provide that experience that's as close to real as possible, that frankly next generation is going to expect based upon what they can experience today on a video game, and the advancements of 5G and the headwear is the aspects of the workforce and the people being comfortable being recorded. And while the intent is I think appropriate, these are some of the things with any new technology when you balance readiness of technology and people and society readiness for certain types of change. And so those are some of the things that highlight that we do see and watch for.
Thank you for that. And Elizabeth, I think, Ford is in a position where, the consideration is both for the, workforce and internal use cases, but obviously you will be scaling consumer-facing experiences. So how are you thinking about, the privacy and the security piece?
Yeah, that is a very serious and heady subject. Because the platform that we have built our VR and AR upon is in place, it has inherent securities that make things much nicer. So we can only get data that we have access to. But there is another issue, because when you show and provide another way of visualizing and getting immersed and experiencing the data, we manage data, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have the experience part of it, which is like the outcome of that data. And so the teams, basically our solution is to provide these immersive experiences when there are these sensitivities in areas that you can only get to if you have access. So the physical location of the immersion will be monitored and access controlled. So there, and that really helps. We do also do global collaboration. So we have teams from around the world in a globally connected, review. And in that case, all of those teams are in all locations that are also secure. I think the other part was privacy. So most of what we're doing is letting you experience the vehicle, and really the vehicle is the actor. So we don't have those same privacy concerns in most cases of, somebody's personal something getting out there, because it's really that the vehicle is the star of the show and you are like the vessel to experience it. And the only change to that would be when we need customer feedback, and that's, another whole area of study.
Great. Well, it is a deep subject, and it's an important one, and something we certainly do discuss kind of industry wide. But I'd like to shift a little bit, and we of course like to be very positive and supportive of the technology, but there are some shortcomings and there are some challenges. And maybe Scott, if you could start and talk about, what are some of the shortcomings of the hardware and software in some cases, and for both AR and VR, and what would you like to see, in your sort of perfect world, whether it's feature sets or form factor, what problems do we need to solve in that arena?
Yeah, thanks. I'll tell you, I've probably done over 3,000 demos of the HoloLens and to different clients and internally to our engineers. And the first question is this window all I can see? Because you get a limited aspect, a limited view. That would be the number one place to improve, and it's my understanding that the next version of the HoloLens will have a larger viewing capability, side to side, up and down. So that would be number one. I would certainly expect and hope that these types of devices, as they progress, will get lighter and more comfortable. And they're already making strides to help folks in the industries we serve by Trimble now makes a hard hat that you can wear with your HoloLens. That was a limitation before. I would say as far as software applications and the pipeline, the pipeline for content, getting it into mixed reality has been a challenge. It's much better. If I had a wish list, I would call out Autodesk. I'd love for them to make Navisworks compatible so that anything we put in Navisworks could go right into the HoloLens. That would be my number one request. So Autodesk, if you're listening, be happy to see that. I would say that I fully expect that with not only HoloLens but VR is much more stable, much more easy to work with, and I would suggest that be a good first place for folks who haven't done anything to work in. And it's certainly, what I see is that these VR sets are going to start turning their cameras on, and they're going to start having more mixed reality immersive experiences. I wouldn't be surprised to see, algorithms that can see the people around you in the real world and put them into the experience of the virtual world through their cameras. I think it's only going to get better. And with the advent of blockchain and some other technologies, perhaps that could be used for security for data. But security is probably the biggest issue as to why we've not done more with our clients with anything related to sensors and IoT connectivity, because it's just a huge issue, and it's not something that is really solvable at this point by us. We'll probably let somebody else solve that and be a fast follower. So hopefully that made some sense.
No, indeed. And Michael, what about you? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing and hoping to overcome, and what would you like to see the next iterations look like?
Yeah, certainly building on what Scott said, and I agree with all those points. And again, we take a view is that we're in the early phases of the technology, and all these things are going to be improved. There's no question about it. And I think no question the eyewear, the headwear experience we see will get better. We think back to the point Scott mentioned about 5G and data transmission, very important. And also the where and how cloud data and edge data in the transmission of data with IoT, where those things come into play to provide a more natural experience and an experience where, based upon cost of where data is coming from or going, i.e. the cloud versus the edge, all those types of issues, again, today are not completely solved, but confident that they will be. And that's really all tied into how we tend to operate as more of a fast follower as the technology matures. And again, I don't have a crystal ball as to when, but we feel those things are important for the experience, which is where we come from, and certainly will be solved and take us to a more and more natural experience visually, as well as the actual wearable aspects of the technology.
Great, thank you. And Elizabeth, maybe you can close us out with, your sort of wish list for the technology. What would you like it to see? What would you like to see happen with it over the next 5 years?
Oh, well, thank you. I agree with everything Michael and Scott said, so that's good. And then I would add a little bit about the cloud. I think the cloud is a really good application for rendering. We could render in the cloud, and we wouldn't need our devices to maybe perform as well as they do if they're self-contained. If we could rely on the cloud for some of those aspects, that would be fantastic. I think another thing is that there's a exciting and really profound change coming, I think, using deep neural networks for immersive realities. So what are you seeing? What does it mean? Why did you do that? So it's really learning human behaviors and applying those learnings through understanding that we can get from deep neural networks, and really learning what we see, understanding what it is, and then knowing it the next time, which is the machine learning aspect of it. So if we're really completely connected and we can share back and forth, and we can continue to learn, and the SLAM tracking is just phenomenal. So not being tethered by a space or a room scale tracking or virtual space tracking, but being able to go anywhere like you can with a HoloLens, and applying that same type of philosophy to any device. I think in the end, like all of those things that we all talked about, will allow us to understand holistically the environments that we're creating in the immersive space.
Thank you. Well, the good news is I think we will all get our wish, and this is all coming. And with that, I'd like to close out and thank all of you for joining us, and I'm going to hand it back over to Pete Karkeek.
Hi, thanks, Amy, and thanks to all the panelists. Thanks so much, Elizabeth, Scott, and Michael. There was some really, really valuable insight there, and I hope everyone listening got as much as I did from it. Just to reinforce, this webinar was produced in conjunction with the Immersive Enterprise event coming up in Boston in June 26, 27. It's a great place to come and learn more from these industry leaders that we've had on the webinar today, as well as other speakers from Lowe's, Lockheed Martin, Johnson & Johnson, Skanska, GM, Gensler, a real cross-industry representation of real XR leaders. So we're very much looking forward to that. Hope as many as of you on the webinar can join us. For full details, check the link at the bottom that you can see on the slide, or simply search Immersive Enterprise in Google, and it will take you straight to the site. Anyway, without further ado, I'll sign off and leave you to your working days or your evenings, and thank you very much for joining us.